This is unlike any headphone you or I have ever heard. Hey, I'm DMS, you're watching the Headphone Show with Headphones.com, and today I have the Warwick Acoustic Bravura. This is an electrostatic headphone, one that's not like any other electrostatic headphone I've ever heard or seen before. Let's start off with building comfort. Now, this, being electrostatic, doesn't have magnets in it, and that makes it very, very light. A lot of the chassis has this soft touch finish to it. Very, very thick padding all the way around, and the strangest looking driver array I've ever laid eyes on. Now, this does have a proprietary system of connections with it, and that's because you have to use this headphone with their own specific amp and DAC. Now, why do you have to do that? Well, that's because this headphone operates at over 1,000 volts. That's a lot of juice. Luckily, their proprietary amp is nicely built. It is very satisfying tactile switches, and the knob is a stepped attenuator. Get a little bit of sound from that. Sounds nice. Inputs on the back: power, USB, coax, and then we have analog inputs as well in the form of RCA and 3.5mm should you choose to use them. Honestly though, I'd say it just makes sense to run USB into this. Comfort is pretty great considering how light it is. Though, being an E-stat, it does seal pretty firmly to your head, and you'll probably notice a bit of air pressure at first when you're wearing it. There are ways to mitigate this. For example, when putting it on, I can just put my thumbs under the pads, put it on, and then let go. And something else that you notice, with or without glasses on, is that I can hear the bass from my voice much louder than when these headphones are off. And it's not that they're closed off, because I can hear everything in the room around me, but it's almost like the seashell effect of holding a seashell up to your ear and hearing the ocean. They're not noisy, but low frequency sounds in the room are a bit amplified. In a quiet room, this is no problem at all. I can't hear things like my air conditioner or anything like that. The cable is big and beefy, but it is a bit microphonic. I do hear, anytime I move my head, the cable brushing against my clothing, against the table, anything else. So if I had to complain about something in the build, it would be that. But what you guys really care about is sound, so let's talk about subjective sound first, and then frequency response later. This is everything I wish I used to get out of a Stax headphone. The bass is deep and extended, it's not shouty, the staging is great, the resolution is there, it just feels right. In fact, I would go so far as to say that this has some of the best sounding bass that I've heard in a headphone, period. It's not super boosted, but it is crazy deep sounding. Listening to Lorne tracks, it is like having my SB3000s both in the room. I mean, we're talking like insanely low sub-frequencies that just flutter. And that is not something I've ever really been able to get out of an electrostatic headphone, even a lot of planars. It has plenty of ear gain, and some parts of the treble can definitely get airier and a little bit brighter than others. It's definitely not sibilant, but there is a lot of information going on up there. But across the board, the mid-range, the bass, everything. If something like Bravura is a 4K TV, then this is a 6K TV. The nuanced detail is absolutely insane. The treble and mid-range tuning might not be as exciting as some people would like, but to me, it sounds just about right for an electrostatic headphone. It leads to a natural timbre that's not thin, it's not metallic, it's not too airy, it's not too boomy, it's just right across the board. Good. Focal intimacy is great, soundstage is great, but there are things that soundstage wider, but I don't really care about having even wider soundstage given how much of the room and how much of the space I can hear in the recording. That sounds like a ton of praise, I know, and it is, and you might be the person who wants more stage, you might be the person who likes to listen on the 800S or something like that. But once you hear the quality and detail in the bass this produces, I feel like it's hard to go back. I have this headphone in for a limited amount of time. I have to send it back out soon, and I am already missing it. Which isn't to say it's perfect, and I know that Warwick Acoustic actually has a higher end model than this in their lineup, and I listened to both at Munich side by side. If you really want that extra crazy detail, yes, there is a higher model available, but this really aligned more with my personal preferences. Another neat thing is that Warwick Acoustics claims this is pretty resilient to things like dust, which is nice considering a lot of electrostats aren't. I mean, I've had E-stats in the past that you get a grain of dust in there and they're ruined. So I suppose it's nice that when you have something with this high of a price tag, well, you know, it's going to be a little bit more resilient. Now, seal does really affect the quality of the bass. You can just barely break the seal and you can hear the resonant frequency increase inside the cups. Just a very small amount brings that deep bass much higher in level, but much lower in extension. So having a good seal is absolutely critical to getting that super crazy deep sub bass, as you would expect from an electrostatic driver. But even when you would expect a better seal leading to better extension with an electrostat, I still don't think you would expect low frequency quite like this. The best way I could describe it is very much like the all-encompassing sound of my speaker system, though a bit more omnidirectional considering my speakers are directly in front of me in my listening room, and headphones kind of give you more of that all-around sound. But it's almost like when you're listening to speakers in the room and you play that one track that gives you a bit of a rush. Well, I'm getting that with these as well. And that is an experience that is hard to replicate. I might have to sell some headphones on my collection and get this thing. I don't know. That's really tough. I already have so many headphones that I love so much. But this would top off the collection very nicely. It's just a great sounding headphone. It's not without fault, but damn, it is something special. Enough of me gushing. Let's talk about frequency response and objective sound. In continuing my preferred practice of not measuring the headphone or looking at measurements until basically all the subjective parts of the video are finished, this bit was actually filmed many weeks after the rest of the video. So with that said, I have the frequency response here on my phone. Let's go over it. So it is no surprise to me that the Bravura actually measures really well. There are some areas where it deviates from the frequency response, but let's start off with treble. For the most part, treble is pretty target adherent. We do see a little bit of a recess around 2 kilohertz, though definitely not significant. We get a bit of bumps just throughout the mid-range, but the mid-range is still pretty target adherent and linear, very present. Big thing to note here is that the entire ear gain region is, well, pretty close to the target without exceeding it too much or dipping below it too much. It just kind of rides along the line. As we get into the low frequencies, we start to see a bit of a rise from, say, the 150 hertz area all the way up to about 70 hertz where it tops out. And then we start to recess again before we get a flat bass extension without a hard roll-off. E-stats tend to have a bit of odd performance in the bass to begin with, and this one having some level of DSP correction built into its amp DAC system. I would expect for it to do something interesting in the bass. But looking at this, you can definitely see where the bass extension that I was talking about in the subjective areas of this review come from. But we also have that bit of a boost in the 70 hertz region. I believe that's responsible for the headphone's extra punch and presence in the bass without sounding bloated or muddy. I mean, overall, from an objective standpoint, this is a pretty great headphone, and it's that way from the subjective perspective as well. Okay, back to old DMS. This is a hard headphone to compare to others. It really isn't like any of them, I guess primarily because it is an electrostatic driver, but it just takes that airy, fast, zippy sound to another level. Zippy is a strange word to use. It's so hard to describe what it is that really fast, thin electrostatic drivers do, because they just don't sound like anything else. Things like the mezzes, you can pad roll them, you can get more quantity of bass out of them, you can get wider soundstage out of them, but you don't get the same quality of bass that you get with this. And I know I've talked about the bass a lot, but it is something that really stood out to me as exceptional sounding. You realistically could buy a number of headphones out there that are less expensive than this and have a small collection for the same price. You could buy something like a Bravura, a DAC, and an amp. You get a cheap amp, you get a cheap DAC, you do whatever you want. But this is also convenient in the sense that it is an all-in-one encompassing system. You get it, you plug it up to your computer, and you listen, and that's it. There's no having to choose an amplifier, having to choose a DAC, figuring out what's gonna work best for it. It just is the complete package. And there's definitely an audience for that, though I do feel like a lot of audiophiles like myself like to tinker and mix and match things. There's also a level of control though. When you have a system that is all-encompassing, well, you can make sure that every component matches and plays well together. You can have a level of DSP incorporated in your DAC and amp so that your tuning falls exactly in line with what you want it to be. You can be sure the headphone's getting the exact power it needs, that it's consistent, and that it plays well with its characteristic of driver and sound. And that really is the only way that Warwick Acoustic could have pulled this off, is by making a complete package. That's probably why it flies higher than the rest of the headphones I've mentioned. The rest of those headphones are headphones, whereas this, well, it's a system. That's really where I would like to leave this, is that Bravura is not a headphone. Bravura is a sound system, and it is an exceptional one that I would really like to own. I have too many headphones, and I feel like this would spoil me and I wouldn't be able to review things. Maybe one day. On the flip side of that, we're gonna have a review of this headphone's big brother coming in the relatively near future, so make sure you stick around and subscribe. You do not want to miss that. I'm gonna wrap this thing up because I've just been gushing for God knows like 20 minutes. Obviously, I very much like the Warwick Acoustic Bravura. It was my favorite thing that I heard when I was at High End in Munich, and it is still just an absolute gem. I'm glad I really got to try it out in here in a quiet environment, and I'm going to miss it very much. So that's gonna wrap up this video, guys. If you liked it, please leave a like down below, a comment, let me know what you want to see in the future. If you want to get active in the community, you can at the forums, the link in the video description. As always, don't forget to stick around, subscribe for more videos like this in the future. Till the next one. Peace.